Tonight we are at the fourth point in our Old Testament survey as we've been going along. We are now at the place of covenant. As a way of refresher, we started out with creation. God created all things, and when He created it, it was what? It was good, because He always makes things good, right? But then the second point comes along, which is fall, which means we made everything bad. Okay, that's basically the point of it, that God created things good, and yet that sin made things bad, turned everything against it, so much so that number 3 came about. That sin increased so much that God sent a flood to remind people He's not going to play around with sin forever. There will come a reckoning day. There will come a day where sin is punished. And that even at the ark, there was this point of how that God was going to come about and bring about redemption. And even that there was wrath of God coming, and yet there was sparing of those that have followed God. And so tonight we get to this point of covenant. You see in your opening couple words there that God's covenant with Abraham is pivotal, not only for an Old Testament understanding, but for a global redemptive plan. Through Abraham's faith, God's plan for salvation is further revealed. You see on your notes, it says Session 6 Covenant, even though we're on point 4, because we had 2 opening things. This is going to be confusing for me, okay? So that's right. This is our 6th week on it. But we're going to look at this 4th point in covenant. I want you to turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 11, just so you see how these 2 things come together. Because the last thing about the flood section is that when creation started to start again, and they came together, the last thing that we talked about in that section was a tower in the city of where? Babel. And so what's happening is that God's people have been told to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and they are all trying to stay in one place. They're supposed to make a name for God, and yet they're trying to stay there so they can make a name for themselves. And so then what happens is that God sends them out, makes their speech like Babel, confuses them, and sends them all over the place. And then the very next thing, that happens in Genesis 11, right? You see verses 1 through 9 there is the whole story of Babel. And then you see what happens next is number 10. It says Shem's descendants. And you go, what in the world is that? Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. This is one of his sons, and this is a genealogy. And you go, why is this important? Because what's going to happen here is it's going to show the family line all the way down. If you look into verse number 31, it says, Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And then it starts chapter 12. So what happens is chapter 11 shows man's final attempt at trying to reach God. God scatters them among the nations, and now He's about to call a man and say, now I want you to go reach those nations. The nations I just scattered, I'm going to start a plan through you that all of those nations are going to be reached, and they're going to be brought back together. So these things happen right beside each other. A lot of times when we'll talk about the stories in different places where Babel's over here, Abram's over here. But this is one story leading up to God separating the nations, sending them out because they were trying to reach God on their own initiative. They're trying to work their way up to God. And Abram starts the path when God is going to come down to man. See the difference? So they were trying to reach God by their own efforts, but now God says, I'm going to scatter you because now I'm going to come down to you and bring these nations back together. So we get to the call of Abram there in chapter 12, and this is kind of one of the old historical artifacts. This is actually a Polaroid picture of Abram way back in the day, okay? But this is a painting of Abram, who was a wealthy man and had a kind of caravan of folks that were around. And yet there was one thing that he didn't have in his old age. What was it? It was a child. And so this is kind of where this story starts off on the call of Abram. So the first thing is that Yahweh, remember Yahweh is the covenantal name that's given to us by God. Yahweh calls Abram to leave his home for another country. So Yahweh calls Abram to leave his home for another country. The first thing that we see of Abram, by the way, all we know of Abram at this point is who his grandparents are. Like, we don't know anything else about him. We don't know, why was he called? Why was he selected? Just because God did. There's nothing else about him. Did he do anything noble? Oh, no. We've seen nothing noble of Abram. We just see him in a line of genealogy. In chapter 12, verse 1, it says, Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Did you catch what he doesn't tell him? What's the name of that land? Did you catch that? Get up and leave. I'm going to show you where you're going. Where are we going? Well, I'll tell you when we get there. Don't y'all love when somebody does that? You get in the car with them, and they just say, how much car? You go, no, I need to know where we're going, right? here's what God says. Get up and leave. I'm not telling you where you're going yet, but just that direction. Ah, great, right? It was step by step, faith, obedience, following him. And Hebrews chapter 11, I forget the verse now, but when it talks about Abram, it says that he went out to a country, yet he did not know where he was going. And so there was this kind of step of faith that he says, okay, God, I'm going to leave this and leave what's home and comfortable. And think about this. Abram is going to start the Jewish faith that will lead to the Christian faith, which is all a missionary faith to reach the nations. And the first one is leaving what's home, what's comfortable, to go and reach someone else. Number two, God promises to make a great nation from him. God promises to make a great nation from him. Verse 2, it says, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, how many of you, wouldn't that sound great? God said, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going to bless you so much. In fact, people who bless you, I'll bless them. And if they mess with you, they better get ready, right? Hey, that sounds awesome, God. Can I get some of that? That sounds great. God promises he's going to make a great nation from him, but also it says he was blessed in order to be a blessing. This is so intentional about Genesis 12, and Peter's going to write about this in 1 Peter. But the fact of blessings are never an end to themselves, okay? So if I've ever been blessed with anything, it's not just so I can just look around at my blessings and go, wow, look at all these blessings. Normally, we are blessed way more than what we possibly need in order to be a blessing to somebody else. This is something my wife does. A lot of times if we're going out to eat something and we'll go to a restaurant and she'll say, she asks it every time, and she's never going to get a different answer, but she'll look at it and goes, well, do you want to share something? No, I don't want to share anything. There's nothing on this menu unless you get the major platter, the left side of the menu. Then yeah, we can share. But she'll look at, do you feel like sharing something tonight? No, I don't. I'll never feel like sharing a meal ever with you. I love sharing so much, but that is never going to be enough. I always think I can not only eat my meal, I can also eat your meal, right? Okay, like I don't need to share anything with you, but she's going to say, you sure you don't want to? And I go, no, I'm fine there. But there have been a few occasions I will go, sure, dear, let's share. What would you like to have? Okay, and she will start to eat this little bit, and I'll eat the rest of it. And she's like, "Are you? Is that enough?" And you know what I'll find out? It is enough, right? Like what we think is enough is actually excess, honestly, right? I mean, a lot of times we're seconds and thirds, and you name it, getting snacks in the middle of the day. Like we've got plenty, and so I say that to go. Even when I'm refusing to share, or even if I do share with my wife and we have this meal and I go, did I have enough? You better believe I had enough. I had enough to take care of myself and also to bless somebody else. Well, the same way, I don't care what your bank account looks like. I don't care what kind of history you have, where you'd like to be right now. Right now, all of us in this room, we have food and covering, and with these we shall be content. Amen. We've been blessed. We have been blessed. You are in a place right now, even if you're not where you want to be, you are in a much better position than most of the people in this world. And so for the very fact that we have heat going on in this building, you drove here in some kind of vehicle, I promise you're blessed. And so it's a reminder that whatever we have been blessed in order to be a blessing. That's the goal. And so Abraham starts out, God saying, I'm going to bless you, but it's not to stay with you. Can I just tell you, that's where the Old Testament and the Jewish people got wrong, is that they stopped and they took that blessing and they never handed it out anymore. That was the problem. Same thing that happens in the New Testament, guess what? Same thing happens in every church in America, doesn't it? So we want just to be recipients of that blessing rather than people who actually give it out. So as they begin their sojourning, they arrive in Egypt, where Abram shows his cowardice by lying concerning the identity of his wife. So they arrive in Egypt, and Abram, this is the first thing that we really see about Abram. And this is where I fall more in love with the Bible when I read that they include all the horrible past about some of our heroes of the faith. Because up to this point, what have we seen Abram do? Nothing except get up from his country and do what God told him to do. Has Abram led a Bible study? Has he said a word? Has he preached a sermon? No. He's done nothing. And so now here's the point where we're finally going to get introduced to the character of who God has called to lead all of the families of the earth back to him. Okay? He's going to be blessed so that all the families of the earth are going to come back to him. And now we finally get to see a picture out of all the people God could have chosen. He chose Abram. Let's figure out what kind of man he is. Look at verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. They will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's court, Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here's your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. If you can read, you don't have to read between the lines here. Did Sarah and Pharaoh have an intimate relationship? Apparently they did. Apparently they did. Pharaoh's being afflicted, and he says, why did you let me take her as my wife? What is that implying? This is our first evidence of who Abram is. First story. God, you called this guy? Really? That Abram is so brave of a guy, he's going to reach all the nations, and the first thing he does, hey, you are so beautiful, everybody's going to want you, so just tell everybody you're my sister, okay? Can you do that? And Pharaoh says, I want her, and he goes, okay, she's a great sister of mine. Have at it, as long as you don't touch me. That's the character of the hero right now in the story. That's the character. That's the best that mankind has to offer up to this point. I just want you to get that in your head. Do you see why we need a Savior? Do you see how important this is? Like how much we are messed up at this place that we are in desperate need of a Savior. And so God is calling out. And this is once again, if I'm putting the Bible together, I'm leaving verse 10 through 20 out of there. Don't put it in, for goodness sake. Like just, nobody has to know that story. Why do you put that in there? God has just called this man, I'm going to bless you so that all the families of all the earth will be blessed because of you. And the first story that we see about his character, he is lying about his wife so that somebody else can have her and he doesn't get in trouble. Why in the world do you include that? Because it reminds us Abram is not the Savior. The Savior will come from Abram. It's not Abram himself. So the Bible is not afraid to show you the frailties of its heroes and its main characters. And so with this, the Bible, so if anyone ever tells you, I just don't believe the Bible, it paints a rosy picture of everybody in it. You have not read this thing, okay? It is messed up. It makes your family look pretty functional, doesn't it, right? I mean, this is really messed up stuff here. And so with this, come alongside it, and we realize, I love this part of it. We see in the next chapter that Abram's nephew, Lot, departs from his company to live in a city called where? Sodom. Sodom, you've heard about that place before, right? It's not the kind of place that you want to go and live. It's a very sinful area, and yet Abram's nephew, Lot, departs from his company, and he goes to live in Sodom there in chapter 13, and it talks about this. Guess where? If you follow along, in fact, look at verse 11. They're trying to figure out, they got so much cattle and so much people that are with them there. It says, verse 11, they're figuring out what to do. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed where? East. Do you see that again, guys? Ever since they left Eden, what do they keep doing? Traveling east, further and further away from the presence of God. And so when he goes towards Sodom, that's the direction he goes, further away from the presence of God. This Sodom was the place that if it happens in Sodom, it stays in Sodom. This was the place, okay? This was sin rampant here. And that's exactly where Lot wanted to move to. Now, we move on a little bit. We see God's covenant with Abram, that next section there, that Abram couldn't grasp a great nation coming from him if he couldn't even produce one child. He had a real difficulty for obvious reasons in saying, okay, God, you're going to give me a nation. That's great. But to have a nation means I have to have a family. To have a family means I at least have to have a child. And I don't have one. And have you seen my wife? Okay? Have you seen her? Because she's not getting younger. I'm not getting younger. And God, I'm not sure if you're aware of how this works. That ain't happening. She's not having a child. Not at this stage in life. We try to have a child for years. And that time has passed. And follow this. Isn't it like God to push us to the very end of our human expectations and ability for him to start working? He doesn't say, I'm going to promise you a child in their 20s. He waits till they are 99. Got to that place, right? Like, this is not, normally you don't go to the Lamaze class and you got the 99-year-old going, okay, let me figure out how to do this, right? It's just not happening, okay? And this is where God's going to do this. Why? Because God's going to get the credit for a miraculous birth. Will there be another child from Abraham's family where God can only get the credit for a miraculous birth? Jesus is coming. You think this is miraculous? Oh, you wait a few more chapters, right? We're going to see something very, very miraculous. Look at chapter 15. It says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it just sounds funny. Like, the only guy I got in my house is Eleazar, and God's like, oh yeah, that is pretty bad, right? It just sounds like, Eleazar, he's from Damascus, God. That's my heir right now. You see how bad the situation is? Verse 3, and Abram said, behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven. Number the stars if you were able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Now, God, in this little line here, God promised Abram more descendants than the stars in the sky. This is one of my most favorite pictures in the Bible. You ever taken a walk out at night, you looked up at the stars of somebody you just love? You walk up and go, hey, let's just go. Oh man, look at this. I love on those clear nights just getting out of the car and looking out and saying, hey kids, let's look up at this. Isn't this beautiful? This is God taking Abram, his son, on a walk. Son, see all those stars there? Yeah, God, those are incredible. You made all those? Yeah, I made them all. How long did it take you? It took me about this long. Stars. God, you did all that by just saying that? Yeah, why don't you try it? See if you can do it. I can't do it, God. Hey, Abram, this will be real fun. See if you can count them. Do you know how many there are? No, God, nobody can even count. Just try. Just count them. 1, 2, 3. How long do I have to do it? Just a little bit longer. Just do it. And just count. God, I can't count these stars. There's too many to count. Son, let me tell you something. There's going to be more spiritual descendants from you than are stars in the sky. You see that one up there? You know what that one's named? No, sir, I have no idea what it's named. That one is named Travis Agnew. What in the world is a Travis Agnew? It's going to be a spiritual descendant from your family. He's coming one day. Because of what's happening right here is starting something off. He's going to be used by you.
Yes.
There's going to be something here. That star up there, that's called a Tigner Culpeper. What in the world is a Tigner Culpeper, right? And some of y'all know Tigner, and you're still asking that question, right? Okay. What? Every star represented a soul. A soul that Jesus would redeem. And he says, you can't even count these stars. I'm telling you, there's going to be more spiritual descendants in your family based on what's going to happen. This is going to change everything. And what does it say? Verse 6. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. This is probably one of the most important verses in the Bible, Genesis 15:6. This sets off the entire trajectory for the rest of the Scripture. Don't miss this, because foundational Old Testament principle, faith obtains righteousness. This is so, if I could just get every person who goes to church and tells me all the time that the New Testament's about grace, the Old Testament's about law. The New Testament you get to heaven by grace of God, the Old Testament you get into heaven by the law. No, you do not. Because guess what Abram didn't have in Genesis chapter 15? The law. The Ten Commandments hadn't even been spoken yet. So how can he keep the law if he doesn't even have it? Well, okay, the sacrificial system. There's not a sacrificial system set up yet. So you mean to tell me Abram's not in heaven? No, Abram's in heaven because he's righteous. And you go, Pastor, I can guarantee this. That man is not righteous. Do you see what he did to his wife? Did you just read what I read? He believed the Lord, and God counted it to him as righteousness. How was Abram counted as righteous? Because of faith. Faith in what? Faith in God. And ultimately, he had faith in Jesus. Now you go, I don't see Jesus' name anywhere in those first few verses. It was the promise that God said, your family is going to reach all these people and going to bring them back together. Your family is going to have more spiritual descendants than the stars in the sky. I've got a plan to do this. Do you believe me, Abram? And Abram goes, I believe. And I believe in that moment, at that moment right there, Abram was saved from his sins by the person, the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And you go, how can that be? Scriptures say that before the foundation of the earth, Jesus was slain for our sins. This wasn't plan B. This was the plan all along. And so God said, Abram, I got a plan to make all this work. And you don't have a name yet. You don't have a symbol yet. You don't know how this is going to be. You got to trust me, though. It's coming. Trust me. And Abram says, I believe you, God. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I believe you. And in that moment, I believe his sins were covered by the grace of Jesus Christ found at the person and the work of Jesus on the cross. Faith obtained righteousness. Was Abram righteous because he acted righteously? Obviously not. How was he made righteous? Because he had faith in the coming Messiah. Can I ask you, how are you made righteous today? Is it because you get your act together? It is in faith in Jesus the Messiah. Right then and there. That is the righteousness that we all need. You see why this verse is important for us to understand the rest of the Bible? This is pivotal for us to get. That God says, I'm going to start off this family that's going to change the world. And it starts here with one man believing God's promise about the coming Messiah. Goodness gracious, it gets me excited. Okay, all right. And so while Abram has a great moment, what do you notice about people in the Bible? That as soon as they have a really good moment, what's getting around the corner? Okay? Yeah, they're going to have something that's about to blow up. Or you just know it. You can feel it coming. And this is where we get to helping God out. Sarah comes up with a plan to help God out by allowing her husband to have sex with her Egyptian servant, Hagar. And so at this, we see that this is not the best idea that Sarah has come up with. So what's happening here in this is that in chapter 16, it says, Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. Sarah said to Abram, Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant, and it may be that I shall obtain children by her. And listen to this. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. Well, if that's what you want, dear, okay. Right, okay? He goes along with her plan. Abram, God says you're going to have a child. It's not going to be through me, so why don't you take my servant? She's of the childbearing ages, and why don't you have relations with her, and there'll be a child given? And so Abram goes along with it. He's trying to be a nice husband, let his wife have ideas for the house, goes along with it. And it says that Abram listens to and obeys his wife Sarah. This language is intentionally similar to Adam's curse in Genesis 3:17. Do you remember what it says? Before God gives Adam his punishment, he says this, because you listen to the voice of your wife. Before you listen to my voice, you listen to her. And what does it say here? It's literally almost word for word. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah, his wife. He's basically saying this. This was the promise that was going to happen. Here you are. You're putting your wife's words above my words. You have been disregarding that relationship in so many ways already, and you are putting that in front of someone else. And so Abram goes along with it, but as soon as Sarah realizes that Hagar is pregnant, she regrets her decision and persecutes her until Hagar runs away. Bet you none of y'all saw that coming, did you? You know, as soon as Hagar becomes pregnant, Sarah is through. She is just done. And comes at her with so much hate, so much vengeance that finally Hagar runs away. And says, I can't put up with this anymore. And then God sends an angel to comfort and provide for Hagar and her son in the womb, whose name is, anybody know? Ishmael. So Hagar has a son named Ishmael, and he's very important as far as we go to understanding a lot of, we'll get into this in just a second here. But God even takes care of Hagar during this time. He takes care of the son Ishmael. Now, let's go to the covenant reminder on the back of that page there. And because here's the deal. 13 years after Ishmael is born, God reminds Abram of his covenant. How many years later? 13. You know, Abram he's been waiting a long time, okay? And it is when Ishmael is 13 years old. In that culture, when that boy turned 13 years old, it's about time for Abram to say, son, you're now a man and you can take over and you are the appropriate heir, right? But now Abram and Sarah are actually 13 years older than when originally promised. And now, not only was it unlikely 13 years ago, now it's very much unlikely that this child is going to come from Sarah, and yet God comes again at this point. God changes Abram's name at this moment to Abraham, and father is changed into a father of a multitude. That's what the name change means. That was confusing to you. I thought the guy's name was Abraham. Why are they calling him Abram? God adds a little bit to his name. So as Abram meant father, which is kind of insult to injury, right? And then when he's getting near 100 years old, God changes his name to Abraham, which means father of a multitude. And Abram, you are going to have many, many children, and so your name is going to be changed into Abraham. God instructs Abraham concerning the covenant of circumcision. Now, you hear about this covenant a lot, and it's always a fun one to talk about in church, right? But this is why I do think this is important, because he enters into a covenant that says for these males that there's going to be a certain ritual that they're going to go through. And here's the importance of it. Let me just sort of walk you through this really quick of this that is a physical act with spiritual implications. Here's why I think it's important. It's very interesting. Number one, this helped with masculine hygiene, especially in those day and time, that the act of circumcision was something of a medical discovery that most people wouldn't have thought of. But when God instructs these young boys to be circumcised, it actually was a good thing for them health-wise. And this is also an evidence of how good of a God that he is, because even in some of the laws in the Old Testament and Leviticus, there's sometimes where God gives a rule and makes it a commandment. And you know what it has to do with? Just making sure their bellies are okay in the wilderness. Hey, don't eat this type of thing. Why? I'm making it a rule. Why? Because you'll be sick all night if you do. So I'm making it a commandment. And why was it a commandment? Some of them make sense. Some of them make no sense whatsoever. God's making sure they don't have a tummy ache when they're walking, because that's the kind of God he is. And so even in this is part of that culture wouldn't have seen it as that, but it has to do with masculine hygiene. Number two, this symbolized the importance of the family lineage coming from Abraham. And so this is a picture of that the promise that someone from Abraham's family is going to bless all the nations of the earth. So that's why it is done at that part of the body, to make sure you know this is coming from that family line. And here's also another reason that I think that this covenant was put on these Israelite men, especially as they traveled through culture and would run into people and start having different relationships with people. This was a reminder of God's covenant in the most intimate of settings. Now, I'm not going to draw a picture for anybody here today, but in certain situations, this would be a realization to somebody that this man is supposed to be different. Follow me? There's a difference with him. And why is he not being different in this moment? This is a reminder in the most intimate of settings that this man was supposed to be different than every other man that they came into contact with. And so I think this is a covenant that was very specific about why this was given. Now, when we think through how all this comes to, let's talk about Isaac's birth being promised. God changes Sarai's name to Sarah. It means princess. The change signifies from a local to a global state. So it looks like Sarai, then it goes to Sarah. That word means princess. But when it moves to the Sarah, it really epitomizes this kind of Sarah. She's going to be a princess of a whole lot of people. Sarah's going to be a princess of a global type of people. And once again, we normally think of princess as a young girl getting ready to be married, but it's this idea. You've got a coming king coming from you, okay? And it's going to be a global state. God names their coming son Isaac due to the laughter at the thought of them getting pregnant. Okay, turn over to chapter 17. This is great. I love when God just makes it very, very clear for folks. It says, start verse 15. It says, and God said to Abram, as for Sarah your wife, you will not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. God said, no. But Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. The word means laughter. And actually in chapter 18, Sarah's going to overhear it. She's going to laugh at the thought of her getting pregnant. And God says, by the way, when that child's here in a year, every time you call his name, you're going to remind yourself that you laughed at me. So when he's sticking his finger in the electrical socket here in a little bit, you call his name and you say Isaac, it's going to be a reminder every time you laughed at me saying it couldn't be done. It's going to be a reminder that you laughed thinking that that it's not possible, and I'm going to remind you over and over and over that it is possible with God. God promises to care for Ishmael, but his promise will come through a way that only God can get the credit. Sarah will have this child herself. Now, for all of you ladies, if you can imagine, God calling on you to take a task at 90 years old, you might say, Lord, I'm ready to go. And then he says, let me explain what this task is going to be. And you say, Lord, I don't know. Okay, this is a different task than I was expecting. And yet God is going to get the credit for such an incredible, miraculous birth. Now, I do want to show you this. This is not on your handout, but this is very important for us to understand here tonight because when you get, there's a crossroads that happens in a world religion standpoint. One day I want us on Sunday nights to unpack world religions and sort of look at some of the major world religions. I think that'd be helpful for us to do. But let me just open something up. So Abraham is what we would call, some of you grew up in church where you sang the song, Father Abraham and many sons. You know that song, okay? And so Father Abraham, and what is he the father of? He is the father of what I would call the monotheistic faith. Mono means one, theistic means God, so it's a one God kind of religion. So Abraham, there was a lot of people during those days who believed in many gods. Abraham is credited as starting off the monotheistic faith. Every monotheistic religion traces their way back to Abraham. Every single one. Every single religion that says that God is one and we follow that God, all have their origin point and they point back to Father Abraham. They all diverge at somebody in Abraham's family and disagree with. Does anybody want to guess who that person is? Actually, person of Jesus. Well, you're right about that. We'll get to that in just a second. But when you get to Jesus, this is where the three major monotheistic faiths, I would say that a lot of people would say the top five faiths that are influencing the world today: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, monotheistic, and then Hinduism and Buddhism, by just mere adherents, are kind of some big players on the international stage. There's a lot of little upstarts, a lot of other stuff going on. But those five, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, those first three are monotheistic faiths, and they all agree with Abraham, but they start disagreeing on things like Ishmael, on things like Isaac, but they had a major crossroads at the person of Jesus, and this is why. Judaism believes that Jesus was a false prophet, okay? They believe he was a real man, that he was a real Jewish boy who grew up with real Jewish parents, that was a blasphemer because he claimed to be God. So Jewish people would say he is a false prophet. Are Jewish people going to do a Bible study about Jesus? No, they are not. In fact, I taught Old Testament class on a state university campus, and it's just a very interesting thing to me. You know how offensive the phrase Old Testament is to a Jewish people? Think about that. Old Testament implies there is a what? New Testament, and the New Testament is all about Jesus. And so you look at a Jewish person who says, I'm studying the Old Testament, and they go, that is the Testament. That is the Bible. Genesis to Malachi is what they consider the Bible, and we say, oh, that's just beginning to ours, right? So it's offensive. So Jewish people would say Jesus was a false prophet. As Christians, we would say that Jesus is God. Christianity, that got typed off there, sorry on the edge, that Jesus is God. Can Judaism and Christianity both be right about Jesus at the same time? One of them might be right, okay, but both of them can't be right. Jews say that he is a false prophet. Christians say that he is God. And Islam says he is a prophet, but not God. Okay? So if you talk with someone who's of the Muslim faith, they will say, yes, Jesus was a great prophet, wonderful prophet, points us to the truth. You should read Jesus. You should emulate Jesus. But he's not the last and final prophet. Muhammad is the last and the greatest of prophets. Jesus was leading up to him. So they all start from Abraham, all claim to come from Abraham, and then they get to the person of Jesus and diverge at a very significant path. Now let me show you this family tree really quick. This is Abraham's family tree, abbreviated, starts with Abraham, has his wife Sarah. Sarah's unable to have a child, so he goes to Hagar. Hagar and Abraham have a son named Ishmael, right? And if you go down, and then Abraham and Sarah will have a son named Isaac, right? 13, 14 years later, Isaac will be born. Now here's what's interesting to find. If you go, Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob, whose name is turned into Israel. Israel has 12 sons. There's a lot of generations, and we get to the person of Jesus, okay? Now, Very interesting enough, another story for another day to help explain this, but let me give you a little piece. If you go to Ishmael's family and you go down many generations, do you know who comes from the line of Ishmael? You want to take a guess? It's a guy by the name of Muhammad. Wow. So Muhammad, who started the Islam faith years ago, looked at the Arabic people that were not really organized like some nations. There were more tribes of people. And one day he hears a story from Jewish people. He thought that the urban legend and kind of stuff at the time was that Ishmael, the son of Abraham, had settled in that Arabian area, and that all of those people that he was from came from Ishmael. That was kind of the idea. Well, one day, Muhammad gets some neighbors who are Jewish. And the Jewish people said, hey, have you ever read the Bible? And Muhammad says, I can't even read. I've never read the Bible. I've heard stories. And they said, we'll teach you about the Bible. And so they start teaching about Adam and Eve. And they start teaching about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And all of a sudden, when they start telling the story of Abraham, and they say, well, actually, he had a son that was older than Isaac, whose name is Ishmael. He goes, well, Ishmael, isn't he like the founding father of this whole area here? That we're from him? Yeah. So you mean to tell me that Ishmael is older than Isaac? In our culture, the oldest son is the one who's right, who gets the best, he's the heir apparent. And so all of a sudden, they get their little Bible studies together, and they'd say, hey, Muhammad, this also happened here, and this happened here. And Muhammad started pushing back to these Jewish people who were teaching in the Bible like this. You know what? I heard what you said last time, but I don't think that actually Isaac was the child of the promise. I think it was Ishmael. And they go, we just taught you the story yesterday. What do you mean? He goes, I don't think that's how it happened. In fact, I don't think that Isaac was almost offered on the sacrifice. I think it was Ishmael. And I don't think this happened to Joseph, and I don't think this happened to Jesus. And what happens is, if you've ever read the Quran, you'll notice that a lot of the stories sound very similar, except at some very key points, and then they switch. So Ishmael was the son of the promise. Ishmael was the one who went on the altar. Jesus was taken off the cross before he went to die. Very close in stories, and then it changes at some very critical points. What happens here is he rewrites these stories, and he starts a religion named Islam. And think about it. Islam has something called 5 pillars that you have to follow if you're going to be a good Muslim. 5 pillars. It's confession of faith, it's prayers, almsgiving, fasting during the month of Ramadan, and 1 pilgrimage to the city of Mecca one time in your lifetime if you can do it. Do these 5 things and you get your way to where?
Paradise.
Paradise. Get to heaven. 5 things that you do, what man can do, and you will accomplish something. Look at that family line. What is that family line all about? What man can do. Not what God can do, what man can do. You see this? So the birth that they point to that started this group of people that started the Islam faith all comes down from God, from a man looking at God saying, I don't think you can accomplish this on your own. We need to help you out and do works to accomplish this. And from that, generations later, a religion will be based on basically what? Do these good works and you will find your way to God. And what is all the way down to get to the Christian faith? What is it about? A birth that no man can get the credit for. A birth in the child of the promise, not the child of works. And what was the religion that would come forth from that? Christianity, which is not a religion of works, but a religion of what God can do and what God can do through faith. Do you see this? How significant this shift is that happens. And so this takes place, obviously, on a grander scale for us to see. But you also wonder that if you go to that area of the world today, you kind of understand why they got a little family fight going on, right? Over these religions and how volatile this is. All comes on how you interpret the life of Abraham and Jesus and how you interpret who is where there. So once again, we'll unpack that a lot. Hopefully maybe you learned something just at least from that piece. Now, let's look at what Abraham's job was in there, because Yahweh tells Abraham that his primary job will be to teach his children to follow the Lord. I love this because God is talking about, Abram, you're going to bless all the nations of the earth. He's going, okay, so what do we need to do? Do we need to get an army? Nope. Do we need to get together a group of ministers? Nope. Do we need to get a bunch of prophets together? No. This is what I want you to do. Verse 17, chapter 18. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? He's talking to some angels that are there with him. He says, and Abraham's literally just standing right there. This is so funny. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may, here's the plan, command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Don't miss the simplicity and beauty of this moment, because in a moment when God is speaking concerning global redemptive plans, he centers it around one man teaching his one family to follow the Lord. That's the plan. What? God, don't we need to gather a bunch of, an army, ministers, prophets, priests, kings? Who do we need to gather? Your son. Pour into him. Get everybody in your family together and you pour into that family. And then what? They'll do the same. Then they'll do the same. And they'll do the same. And one day it's going to lead to somebody who's going to bring all these families back together again. Don't ever miss out that when this was happening, that God's plan was for one father to teach his one son the ways of the Lord and to pass that on in faith. That was the goal. Then that should be a goal of ours as well. So what takes place next in this moment is pretty critical. Abraham intercedes for Sodom, but even his prayer reveals how sinful this city is. Remember that God was coming down to visit the sin and the iniquity of Sodom, and he looks down, and Abraham can tell what's about to happen, right? He's about to blow this place up, isn't he? And Abraham says, all right, would you blow up this whole place if I could find 50 people who love you in it? Nah, if I found 50, it might be all right. How about 45? What about 40? What about 35, God? And he keeps going down to a small number of people that says, if you could just find just a handful of people that would follow you, would you destroy the city? He goes, no, I wouldn't destroy the city if I found a handful of people. Guess what? He couldn't find them there. Couldn't find a handful of people. And so what happens is that Lot's encounter shows how sinful the city is, and God rescues Lot before he destroys that city. Lot encounter, he shows how sinful that city is. Angels go in to check on Lot. The men of that community try to think that the angels are someone that they should express very sincere, intimate interest in. And the angels go, okay, it's time now. And there is God's wrath upon that city is great and significant. He tells Lot and his wife to leave and don't look back, right? Don't look back. Don't do anything. You keep going. You keep moving away from that city. And what happened to Lot's wife? You remember what she did? She looked back and she turned into a pillar of what? Salt. So a bad preacher joke somebody told me one time is a 3-point sermon of Lot's wife. She halted, she faulted, she salted. Okay, there you go. So what happens is that in her heart, she's thinking, but I still love that. I still love the sin of that city. I still love the way it is. And she says, oh, is he really going to destroy it? Her heart's still there, and God takes her life right there. And Lot keeps moving. Okay, well, there you go. And just keeps on moving. And God shows how sinful that city is. Matthew 10, 14, 15, Jesus said this, I tell you what, it'd be easier for Sodom and Gomorrah to find repentance than some of the cities he's walking through in those days. Think about that. Sodom and Gomorrah would have repented from this, but not Jerusalem right now. And just to get you a picture of what happens, that God still looks at cities and groups of people and says, there's coming a day of reckoning, that one day he will wake us up. And so as all this is happening, we finally get to this point of Isaac's substitute. Isaac is born and makes laughter for Sarah. Chapter 21, verse 6, and Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age? She embraces it now, right? Okay, this is just funny. Who in the world would think about this, right? And they're going to see this child. Oh, whose child is this, Sarah? You're taking care of. This was mine. Yeah, right? There's no way that you can. With man, things are impossible. With God, all things are possible. And so this child is born, and yet we get to the most crazy point of this entire story, which has been pretty crazy at this point, that when Isaac is older, God calls Abraham to sacrifice his son. Out of all the work that took to get this boy here, out of all the praying, all the waiting, all the guessing, all the drama that took to get him here, he's now finally getting to be of some useful age, And God says, all right, time to sacrifice him. Go to chapter 22, and let's read these verses together, because as God is bringing this covenant together, once again, his goal completely has been, I'm going to fix what got broken in the garden. And the seed of the woman is going to come and going to make all this right again. And they've been pointing to someone who's going to come from Abraham's family who's going to make all this right. And at a key point where a lot of people's hope is in Isaac, this is the child of promise. This is the one that we've been waiting for. This is the one who's going to set everything right. God says not take his life. This is, if you grew up in church, you're used to this story. This is shocking, y'all. This is absolutely shocking. Just to even think about the emotions that go into this. If any of you saw the Bible series that was on the History Channel a few years ago, any of you guys see that? It was like a 10-hour documentary that they did. There are some things in it that are great. Some of it's very odd, and they take a lot of artistic liberty, like the angel that has ninja moves and whatnot, going through like Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's just crazy. So there's some fun stuff in it, but one thing that I think they nailed on it was that when Abraham starts taking up Isaac on their trip, Sarah, obviously this isn't in the Bible, they're trying to get the emotion behind it. She is running out of the house trying to stop it, and they're pushing her back. And she knows what's about to happen. And the terror on her eyes, can you imagine? I have waited 90 years for a child. And now, as we're going to see in a little bit, this isn't a 4-year-old. This is a boy big enough to carry wood up on his back on a mountain. Okay? This is a big boy. And now he's just about to be here, and she's watched him and nursed him and cared for him. And she's now saying, God, you're going to kill him? You're going to kill him? And so the horror that's in this moment, I think, gets a better picture of it. Look what it says in verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham. Hey, just stop right there. He didn't tempt Abraham. He tested Abraham. There's a huge, huge difference. Test is, I expect you to succeed. Tempting is, I expect you to fail. God expected Abraham to succeed here. I know I didn't feel that way when I was a student. I thought tests were to show me how much of a failure I was. Tests are actually meant to show you how well you know the material, right? That's what they're there for. And yet, so God tested him and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, listen to this wording. See if this sounds like any other verse in the Bible to you. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Stop there. Do any of those key words sound like any other Bible verse to you? John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. Only son, love. Why are these words here in this verse right now? Why? Why would he say it like this? Take your son, your only son, Isaac. And some of y'all are thinking, whoa. Abraham's got another son. His name is what? Ishmael. You've got 2 sons. And God says, take your only one. The son of the promise. Not the son of works. Not the son of you helping me out. Not the son of you trying to get your act together and because you don't think I can do it. Take your only son, the one that I promised, right? The one that I have promised that came in a rightful way, the way that I said should be done, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his what? Donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the which day again? On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and what? Come again to you. What? You're taking something to kill him with, and you just told him you're coming back down the mountain. Hebrews 11 tells us that Abraham had faith that even if he had to go through with it and kill him, God had the power to raise him from the dead.
Amen.
Me and this boy are coming back. So help me, God has promised. Worldwide redemption is coming from this line, from Isaac. He has promised. I'm banking on it. Even if I have to kill him, that boy is getting back up and we're coming down this mountain together. I know it. I have that kind of faith in that. You just you wait here, we're coming back down, right? I mean, just think about it. Abraham's finally started to act like the man that God called him to be. Catch this? Took a little while to get here. Verse 6. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father?" And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." Some of your translations say it a little bit different. The Hebrew is not really clear. It either says God will provide for himself a lamb, or God will provide a lamb as himself. Almost the language is almost like God will provide himself as the lamb, or God will provide a lamb for himself. Some way he's saying, I don't know how this is going to happen, but God's going to provide. I don't know how this is going to happen. So they went, both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son. This is an ugly picture, y'all. This isn't just a tiny little killing here. He knows what the sacrifice is supposed to be. He knows what it's supposed to look like, to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, Here I am. You really could wait at the last minute here, didn't you? Okay. And here I am. He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said on this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." Here's the beauty of this story. Once God sees his commitment, he provides a substitute for Isaac. This foreshadows another father who will sacrifice his only son. Abram, I'm going to make a covenant with you, and all the nations are going to be blessed because of it. Somebody from your family is going to bless all people. And Abraham believes that promise so much that he's even willing to take his son up there and sacrifice him. And that on that mountain, Mount Moriah, which guess what? Will become the mountain where the temple is erected one day. That very mountain where sacrifices will be offered for years to come. That very mountain where one day the veil in the temple will be torn in two. On that mountain, as Isaac is about to be killed, God says, "Stop. I'm not going to ask you to do anything to your son that one day I will not do to mine." He stops him right here on that mountain. And a substitute is found for him. A substitute. Now, follow this again, because there's a few things in here that I want you to make sure that you catch. God calls on him on Moriah. Verse 3, Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him. Can you think about another time that a donkey and two men sort of went along somewhere preparing something? Anybody familiar? Jesus says, "Hey, you two guys, can y'all go into town and go get a donkey for me before we go into Jerusalem, where this area is? Go get that donkey for me real quick. Let's go in there, okay?" He cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of God, which he had told him. On the third day, all right, so we got a son following his father up a mountain, and it takes him 3 days to reach his destination. A son following his father up a mountain, take him 3 days to get to his destination. Verse 5, then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship. Come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and what? Laid it on Isaac his son. So a son is following his father up the mountain with wood upon his back. Strapped upon his back as he walks up the mountain, following his father all the way to the place of sacrifice. Now, I don't need to remind you, I don't think so. Genesis 22 was written hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus was even named. You can't make this stuff up, folks. This is God orchestrating What I believe, Moses writing this story down years even later saying, yeah, here are the random details of what we know about the story. I don't know why it's important, but I'm going to write them down for you. And then years later, Jesus obviously can intentionally decide how the way he's going to die, right? You can't do this unless you are God, unless this is all pointing to this. Follow. It's okay. Abraham took the wood, laid it on Isaac his son, handed the fire the knife. They went together. Where's the lamb? Verse 9, he built the altar, laid the wood in order, bound Isaac his son. So his son is now bound. He's, in that sense, he's shackled. Laid him on the altar, top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, going in, he's about to kill him. And then what do you see? Verse 13, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his thorns. What is a thicket, everybody? It's a bush that's full of... So the substitute had thorns wrapped around what part of his body again? It's a crown of thorns. The substitute had a crown of thorns upon his head, stuck in this bush. Why? So that the son could go free. And this son who's on the altar of death, what happens to him? He comes up off of it on the third day. Comes up off this altar. Because there is a sacrifice here, just for us to see. This beloved only son was willing to be sacrificed, follow his father up the mountain, journeyed 3 days to his destiny, carried the wood of death upon his back. The substitute had a crown of thorns, and the son was raised from death. Can I just remind all of you here today, this is not an accident. This is a foreshadowing about God's promise about how redemption was going to happen through Abraham's family. The covenant that started with Abraham would be seen through the life. This story is very special to, obviously, hopefully, all of us because it's part of our spiritual story. But this was the story that in family devotion, because of Genesis 18's impact on me, Abraham, teach your own kids the way, changes the way that I do things with my family. This was the story that was part of Obadiah's conversion one night at family devotion. As he's sitting there and reading this, and we're watching this, and I do this whole thing like, oh, isn't that interesting? There's a father walking up the mountain. Oh, what's on his back? And they're like, oh, that's wood on his back. Oh, yeah, that reminds me of somebody. Oh, let's keep moving. No. What, 3 days? Oh, that's interesting. And all of a sudden, when Obadiah saw the picture in that little storybook Bible, and he sees Isaac come up off the altar, and he goes, a crown of thorns on the substitute. The son came back alive. And he goes, Daddy, I get it. Jesus is my substitute. And literally, in Obadiah fashion, he starts banging on the ground. Daddy, I get it. Jesus is my substitute. He took my place. He took my spot so that I could be alive again. I get it. I'm saved, Daddy. I go, yeah, I'm pretty sure you are, right? That this moment that I want you to know, the Old Testament, this isn't just a collection of random isolated stories. God's had a plan all along. And if he had a plan way back on Mount Moriah for your salvation, guarantee he can take care of your tomorrow too. Amen. Don't ever miss that. If he can take care of you, Romans 8:32, he who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also freely with him now give us all things? Can I just tell you, he's got you in his hand. He's got this work together. And this covenant that was started in Abraham, we are representative of those stars in the sky tonight. And I pray when you leave tonight, you get out there and you see a few, and you remember God's had a plan, and he's had my name written upon it. So, Father, tonight...